Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandy Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello again. Crash diets, workout crazes, mindfulness, meditation and yoga classes. It seems that the more stressful our modern lifestyle becomes, the more we look to comfort foods or feel-good fads to numb the pain or redress the balance. But what if the key to a healthier mind and body has lain hidden in plain sight for millennia? 2,500 years ago, Buddha emphasized one rule for his followers about food: no eating after certain hours. Fast forward to today, and scientists have discovered that this same technique of intermittent fasting has all sorts of health benefits and can help us lose weight. So say Silicon Valley executives Dan Zigmond and Cottrell in their debut book, Buddha's Diet, The Ancient Art of Losing Weight Without Losing Your Mind. Dan Zigmond is Director of Analytics at Facebook and an ordained Zen Buddhist priest who has studied and practiced Buddhism in temples in America, Thailand and Japan. Cottrell is a Silicon Valley health and wellness writer whose work has appeared in a number of publications and on NPR, as well as web content manager for Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. They join us today to share how Buddha's wisdom maps out an attainable path to increased productivity, reduced anxiety, and weight loss nirvana. Dan Zigmond, Cottrell, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm very curious to know what inspired both of you to turn to Buddha for help with losing weight and improving your health and well-being. So Tara, let's start with you. Tell us, what inspired you?
Actually, Dan is what inspired me. Dan and I have been friends for a long time, and I noticed that he had lost quite a bit of weight, and he was at the time working for a food startup where a number of people were following kind of a fasting diet, an intermittent fasting diet, where they would eat for only a certain period of the day, and then kind of have a hard stop in the evening where they wouldn't eat. And he had been kind of experimenting with this diet, and I started talking to him about it, and he mentioned this link to Buddha. Dan obviously knows a lot about Buddhism, and one of the first things that struck him when he started doing this diet and hearing about it was that it was something that Buddha had kind of figured out a long time ago. And so noticing that about Dan and how, he seemed to be, he looked, great, and he was talking about how much better he felt. He was sleeping better. And there was a lot of we tend to do a lot of mindless eating in the evening because that's when we're most stressed and we're trying to unwind from maybe a stressful day. And he had mentioned to me that he had managed to kind of cut a lot of that out, and that was a big problem for me. The kind of eating that I was doing in the evening was, for the most part, after I'd have dinner, it was emotional eating, it was stress eating. And so I was very drawn to kind of how can I get rid of that portion of my day where I'm eating to kind of make myself feel better. And so that's kind of what inspired me to get on the diet as well.
So what inspired you, Dan, to turn this into a book?
So the inspiration for that was Tara. So I was on the diet myself, and I had experienced some great results and had lost some weight that had been slowly gaining ever since I left college. And we got into this conversation about how this reminded me of the time where I lived in a temple in Thailand, and the Buddhist monks there had this rule where they didn't eat after certain hours, and that it kind of reminded me of those days. And so Tara suggested that I write a book about it because she thought it was very interesting, and I said that I would only do it if she would do it with me. And so we decided to do this together.
So it wasn't difficult for you to come up with the idea of weaving Buddha into it?
It was really the first thing I thought of. So as Tara mentioned, I was working at a food startup in San Francisco, and I'd spent my whole career up until that point at software companies, places like Google and Microsoft. So I was used to being surrounded by engineers and statisticians, and all of a sudden I was surrounded by food scientists and chefs. And they were all on different sorts of diets, and they were all sharing the latest research about health and diet. And one day someone shared some papers that they had read coming out of the Salk Institute down in San Diego about this intermittent fasting and what they called time-restricted eating. And the first thing I thought of was that this sounds just like the monks that I used to live with.
So, the shelves of the bookstores, especially in the health and diet area, must be groaning with books. What made you think that another book, particularly one with the word Buddha in the title, would be as successful as this one is appearing to be?
I mean, so many of the diets out there are just so difficult and complicated. And one of the things that Tara said to me when we were first talking about this was, our lives are so complicated. Life is too complicated for a complicated diet. And so we liked the simplicity of this. And then, I do think that Buddha has a lot to teach, and that not only is this a book about eating and food, but it's a way to talk a little more about what Buddha had to say about so much of life.
I think too. I think too that I kind of look at it as a way of life. It is obviously a diet book. It's got diet in the title. But I've certainly heard from quite a few people who've said, "Oh, I didn't really have any weight to lose, but I read this and it's made me think a lot differently about how my relationship with food and how I treat food." And because we have access to all kinds of food at all hours of the day, we tend to eat, even if we're not overweight, we tend to eat things that really aren't doing us any favors, especially in the evening, when it can impact our sleep and things like that.
Well, I have to congratulate you both. Years ago I used to work on dieting magazines, and I've read a gazillion diet books in my time, and most of them, they're just too hard to read because you just feel ashamed or guilty as you're reading them. And yours is a very easy read, as you said, and I'm not surprised by that it's more than just dieting, isn't it?
It really is. I gave it to one friend of mine who, as Tara said, was not particularly focused on losing weight necessarily. And the way he described it actually was, to him it felt like it was a book about mindfulness and mindful life, almost disguised as a diet book. I wouldn't quite say that. I do think it's very useful for people that are concerned about their weight and their eating. But I think it really is also about Buddha's middle way.
Well, it certainly gives us an alternative, and intermittent fasting has become a hot topic in the health and diet industry, and with very good reason. So tell us about some of the science and the data that are backing this up.
Sure. So that original paper I mentioned, was some research that was done down at the Salk Institute, and they started actually looking at studying diet with mice. And so they had these mice, and they let them eat as much as they wanted. They gave them this very high-fat, high-calorie food, like what we would think of as junk food instead of their usual mouse chow. And, not surprisingly, when you let them eat as much of this as they want, the mice start to gain weight and get pretty fat. And then they did the same thing, gave the mice the same kind of food, but as Tara was saying, they stopped them eating after certain hours and only let them eat for 9 hours a day. And they ate about the same amount, but they didn't gain weight anymore. There was something about that period of fasting that they had after they were eating that seemed to somehow protect them against weight gain and gave their metabolism a chance to kind of rest and catch up.
It's interesting that for years we've heard, oh, you mustn't skip breakfast, you've got to make sure you get a really hefty meal in the morning to see you through the day. And some diet books even say that you should snack before you go to bed so that you don't wake up hungry and then cheat in the middle of the night. But yours is proposing something quite different. 9 hours, though, it seems a little bit hard to achieve.
Yeah, I think that 9 hours is probably, it's a good place to start if you've got it's a good place to kind of have as your goal if you've got, quite a bit of weight that you'd like to lose. I'm no longer on, I did get down to 9 hours, and then now I'm back up to, I would say I'm around 10 or 11 hours. And that's very achievable. And with that 11 hours, I've been really able to keep the weight off very easily. What you don't realize is, even if you kind of get to 11 hours or even 12 hours, is how much eating you were doing after that time. I think people, when we were first when I was talking to people about this diet and saying, we often eat after hours and things, and they'd say, oh, well, once I've had dinner, I'm finished. But then if you say to them, oh, do you not have a glass of wine, or do you have some chips when you sit down and watch TV? And they'll say, oh, that counts, right? And so I think you do quite a bit of eating kind of without thinking. And so when you have that kind of stop at a certain time, it really helps a lot. 9 hours is probably, it is challenging for sure, especially if people, you've got children, or you've got work that brings you home late at night. But it's certainly doable. There's, we talk in the book about ways to kind of make that work for you. And once you've lost that weight, honestly, you can kind of move back up a little bit. I have, and I believe Dan has as well, to where we're kind of, reading about 11 hours for me. I think it's maybe more like 10 for Dan.
You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandra Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with Dan Zigmond and Tara Cottrell about their book, Buddha's Diet, The Ancient Art of Losing Weight Without Losing Your Mind. Still to come, how Buddha's diet impacts every aspect of your life. We'll be back after this break.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
My name is Meera Batra, and this is How I Live United. Many families have come to America for a better life. I advocate for these families with United Way. United Way empowers them to see opportunities available. We help them get involved with their kids' schools and network within the community. My name is Meera Batra. I help families see opportunity and succeed. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer, Live United. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Tara Cottrell, you say that the Buddha's diet impacts every aspect of one's life, from our relationships and emotional state, even our creativity and productivity. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think that, as I was saying earlier, I think one of the things that Buddha's diet has helped me with so much is recognizing how much I was eating and how much people eat when it's related to their emotions. And one of the things we say in the book is, that you really have to check in with yourself. If you're stressed and hungry, or tired and hungry, or sad and hungry, chances are you're just sad or tired, and so, the hunger part is something we've kind of taught ourselves to kind of add on. Right, we've taught ourselves, through this kind of habit loop that, when I'm stressed, I eat, right, or when I'm stressed out, I have a glass of wine, and so I think all that kind of behavior, it's really it really takes away from what we should be doing, which is, really checking in with, well, why am I stressed? Have I had a fight with my spouse, or am I stressed about something that just happened at work, or am I sad for some reason that I'm not checking in with myself about? And so, one of the things for me personally is realizing that, when I get home from work, particularly, trying to find other ways to kind of release that stress. Maybe it's going for a walk, or talking to the kids about their day, or, maybe it's reading a little bit, or even being on my phone for a bit to text a friend or something, but something where I'm not immediately kind of walking in the door and opening the cupboard, which is kind of what I used to do. That was absolutely a habit of mine, where I'd come in and think, what can I eat, right? And so it forces you to look at the sources of those stressors, rather than, how many of us use food and alcohol.
What about you, Dan? Creativity and productivity at work, did it actually help you increase yours?
I think so. I do think it gives me more energy. I think that sort of all that extra eating I used to do would sort of almost like wear me down. Parts of our bodies, like our heart and our lungs, we're really made to operate 24/7 and go without stopping. But our metabolism, just really wasn't built like that. And if you look out in the wild, if you look at how animals eat, how people ate in traditional cultures, they weren't having midnight snacks. They weren't eating all the time that they were awake. And so this modern way of eating we have is putting stress on our bodies and kind of wearing us down in ways that just isn't really necessary. So I find I have more energy. I'm a little sharper. And that it's really helped me find that balance.
Before you wrote the book, did you actually test some of these principles out on your colleagues at work?
I think several of our friends tried this, and of course we did ourselves. And then we did a lot of research on the other studies that had been done, and there have been studies of people eating this way, and the results are pretty universally positive.
And what about you, Tara? Were you persuading your colleagues at the Stanford Business School to take up this diet?
It's interesting. I think people notice, when you're feeling and looking better, right? You can kind of say all you want about, oh, I'm on this diet, and, talk about it and kind of, promote it and things like that. But really people notice a change, in other people. It's certainly how I, first noticed it with Dan is, people have noticed it, with me. That maybe I have more energy, and I'm, we have this a big candy bowl by the front door when people walk in, and I would probably have 5 or 6 of these little like fun size bars throughout the day, and my colleague said the other day, like, oh, I notice you're not eating those so much, and so people are interested, like, how are you doing this, right? And so it's been interesting watching people kind of give it a try when at first they say, oh, well, that sounds hard. And it's actually not hard, especially when you look at all the other things that are out there, like juice fasts and, paleo, that can be really challenging for people, especially kind of during work hours when, maybe your access to different types of food is a little bit more limited.
Dan, you were Zen Buddhist priest, and obviously you know an awful lot about Buddha. Tell us some of the rules that Buddha had, especially around food.
Well, so the interesting thing is, when Buddha was laying down rules for his monks, and he laid out, quite a few, there's over 200. They cover all sorts of things, exactly what monks can wear, where they can sleep, how they're supposed to sort of comport themselves during the day. But there are really very few rules about food. And this rule about not eating after certain hours was one of the few that he really insisted on. And in fact, when he kind of would make shorter lists of rules for people who maybe wanted to be monks in the future, or even just very devout lay people, he tended to focus on the big things like no stealing and no killing and no lying. But this funny rule about food and not eating after hours, generally made those lists as well. So it's obviously something that was important to him.
And did he practice this religiously?
Yes, absolutely. So, and at some point, I think there's in the scriptures, someone asks him about it, and he just says that practicing this kind of moderation is beneficial for his health, and that anyone else who practices it will also see positive results in their health.
Now, people might think this is a book about Buddhism, but it isn't really. I mean, it's really about mindfulness and thoughtfulness around eating, isn't it?
I think it is, and I do think, as Tara was saying, one of the things you notice when you go on this diet is just how much mindless eating you used to do. So the first step that we recommend is to limit your eating to 12 hours. And most people, when they first hear that, they say, "Oh, I already do that. That sounds very easy." And it's not hard. I think anyone can do it. But I think it's not quite as easy as people might think at first, because they find that, yes, they used to stop dinner within 12 hours. But then there would be, the little bit extras that they were having here and there, as Tara said, the glasses of wine, the bowl of chips or something like that. And a lot of times they don't even realize that that's something they used to do until they kind of catch themselves when they start out on the diet. So a lot of the book is really about just being more mindful, just paying attention to what we're eating, but also to everything else that we're doing.
Now, Tara, there are no specific foods, no grocery lists, no insistence on vegetarianism, veganism, high protein, low carb. That must make you awfully popular with your readers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the things that people, think about Buddha and, Buddhism is that you have to be a vegetarian, and that's just not true. Many are, but I'm not I'm not, vegan or vegetarian. And I think there's a whole variety of food that you can eat. And we talk about this in a little bit in the book about, foods that are helpful. Obviously, you don't want to be eating junk food all the time, but I think you can really get into trouble when you have these diets that are very restrictive, because what happens is you're just not able to maintain it, and it becomes very difficult. And we all talk about going on a diet, kind of knowing that we'll go off it just like we do with all the other diets. And this is one that you can kind of maintain because it's not restrictive about what you can eat. And, you can go out to restaurants and you don't have to, ask about, does this have gluten in, or is this, that or the other. So I think that's a real selling point for this type of diet, is that it gives you some freedom about what to eat.
Have you had a lot of feedback from readers, positive or negative?
We've gotten a lot of positive feedback. So we have a Facebook page, and we've gotten some great comments there. People have reached out to us on Twitter, and then it's been fun for me to have colleagues, more now that are trying it and come up to me and tell me about the success that they're having. So people really do seem to be taken by it and to be having some success with it.
And I think people, too, what I've heard from people is that they're also very grateful for the data. Even people who, I hadn't really expected to be so interested in the science behind it, really appreciate that there's, that we didn't just make it up, right? Yes, there's a spiritual component to it, but there's also the underpinnings of science that we did a lot of work with, looking at, is this type of diet proven? And it really is.
Well, another thing that must make it very popular with readers is that you actually say cheating can be good for you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that. I think, first of all, any diet that's just too hard to follow is one that you're not going to be able to keep for very long. And so it's important to have almost like a safety valve where you can compensate for situations, whether it's a work event or a birthday dinner or something like that just can't fit into the schedule that you normally use. But also there's some evidence that your metabolism can kind of over-adapt to changes like this, so that it really slows down and makes it harder and harder to lose weight if that's your goal. And occasional cheating, maybe once a week or so, is almost a way of tricking your metabolism into not adapting quite so fast and continuing to burn calories.
So are we talking about, a little cheating here, or a full-blown, down the slippery slope kind of cheating?
About once a week is usually pretty safe, and that's more or less what I do. Buddha's whole principle is really around moderation, and we recommend moderation even in cheating.
Well, that's good. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with lifestyle and wellness writer Tara Cottrell and data scientist and Zen priest Dan Zigmond about their book, Buddha's Diet, The Ancient Art of Losing Weight Without Losing Your Mind. After the break, when we come back, we'll be looking at some practical tools and exercises for starting the diet, and also for developing a pattern of eating that you can maintain for life. We'll be back in a moment. Don't go away.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, I found a toy dinosaur over on the playground by Smith Street. It had this phone number on it, and, well, I just wanted to make sure the dinosaur made it back to its little owner.
When I found a little sippy cup, I just had to give you a call. It's for a kid,
I know my son gets super attached to the smallest things, even a fire truck, and I'd be happy to drop it off.
We'd do anything for kids, yet 1 in 6 children in the U.S. struggle with hunger. Help end childhood hunger near you. Learn how at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Dan Zigmond, how do we move from our current eating clock to one that's more sensible and healthy?
Well, the first step we recommend, as we were talking about a few moments ago, is to start with a 12-hour window. So if you have your breakfast at 7 in the morning, then try to finish up dinner by 7 at night. That usually is relatively straightforward for people. They often don't have to reschedule their meals very much at all. But what it does force you to do is to think about all that mindless eating you used to do, before or after your actual main sit-down meals. So we really recommend that as a great first step.
How do you help people who have had it drummed into them since childhood that it's a sin to waste food?
Yeah, that was one of the kind of eye-opening things I think about that part of the book is realizing in looking at these studies how many of us have been told since childhood that we should never waste food. And there's all kinds of reasons we were told that, many of them very well-meaning, that there were people who were going hungry across the world, which obviously is still true, or that food is expensive, or we might be hungry later. All these things that we're told as children, or maybe to clean our plate before we can have our dessert. And so children actually know quite well. There's been studies that say that children actually do know when they're full, but we have a tendency to say, just have that last bite, or 2 more bites, or you're not going to have any dessert if you don't do this, and things like that. And so we set up a very kind of complicated relationship around food waste, and it's really many of us have that feeling of not wanting to waste something. I used to, before I started Buddha's diet, I had a tendency to, kind of clean off my kid's plate. In a restaurant, I would think, oh, well, I'll finish that off for you, right? And I wasn't hungry for it, and I didn't particularly enjoy the chicken nuggets, or whatever it was. But I really had those thoughts about wasting food, that it was very, almost immoral not to waste food. And many of us have those feelings. And the problem with that feeling is really that it impacts, us overeating, right? And we talk about choosing the right garbage can, right? So, sometimes it's okay to choose the actual garbage can or the compost bin, or maybe take it as leftovers if you want to have it the next day or something like that. But really, food is often wasted well before it gets to us, in terms of, the manufacturing and things of that nature. And so really there's not a lot we can do about that once it's already kind of on our plate. We can, obviously we can buy less, and when you're at a restaurant, plates are so big these days, you're probably fine with an appetizer a lot of the times. But when we clean off our plate, when we don't really want the food, we're choosing our bodies as the garbage can, because we so hate wasting food. And so that's a mindset that I think really you have to embrace for Buddha's diet to work. And it really cuts out a lot of this overeating that we all tend to do, that's brought on by the psychological need not to waste food.
One of the points we make in the book is that eating when you're not hungry is just another way of wasting the food. It's not doing you any good, and it doesn't help any of those people out there who might be hungry. It's just hurting your health without really helping anyone.
Well, that's true. But, dieting is an awful lot easier when you live alone, when you have no kids, you have no social life. In other words, when you've got a certain amount of control. What about those times, like holidays, social occasions, erratic working hours, when, to refuse food that somebody has gone to great effort, where people are all gathered around, purely to have a celebration meal or something? What tips do you offer at times like those?
Well, when it's truly unavoidable, as we were talking about before, like a big birthday dinner or something like that, then by all means make that your cheat day that week, and go ahead and enjoy it. And there's no reason to feel guilty about that. As we said, it might even be good for your diet to cheat now and then. On other occasions, sometimes you can rearrange your schedule a little. Shift your window a little bit later to accommodate if you need to eat later. And one of the things that I think we learn when we go on Buddha's diet is just how much we socialize with food when we don't even necessarily need to. Not every event that we do with other people has to involve eating and drinking, but so much of it does today. And so I think it also gets you thinking about alternatives. Can you take a walk with someone instead of meeting them for a drink? Can you do other things to celebrate or to mark an occasion, other than eat cupcakes?
There's some very interesting research in your book. One of the pieces that intrigued me was about the modern world upsetting our circadian rhythms, and that limiting meals and snacks to specific windows can actually help restore those rhythms. What piece of data, when you were researching the book, surprised you the most?
I think I was surprised at just how many sort of internal clocks our bodies really have. That, we all understand that there's this sort of sleep cycle, and we were supposed to sleep at certain times and wake up at certain times. But, I think when you dig into the research, really, like almost every organ in your body has some sort of circadian rhythm where it's, intended to be kind of active at some times and inactive at others. And I have never really thought about that. And particularly with our metabolisms, that if you look in the animal world, there just aren't animals that eat all of the time. They seem to have some instinctive knowledge that they're, if they're nocturnal, they eat only at night. If they're daytime animals, they eat only during the day. So honestly, you don't see very many overweight animals out there. They seem to know how to control themselves, and just that our metabolisms really weren't meant to work the way that the modern world tries to force them to work.
I was surprised this morning to receive in my email a notification about how they're discovering that LED lighting upsets our circadian rhythms.
Yeah, actually that's one of the things that we talked to Dr. Panda about, who Dan was talking about, the study, the Salk Institute study, and he's doing some interesting research on light. And our world is, especially kind of in this country, and for the most part, it's too bright. A lot of times we have, we have, and it's usually under the guise of kind of safety that we need to have so much lighting. But it actually it really kind of wreaks havoc on our bodies and our, as Dan was saying, our circadian rhythms. It's kind of that experience of, the extreme is, of course, like when you go to like Las Vegas or something, and you lose track of time, right? When you go into those casinos and you completely lose track of what time it is, and you don't feel tired, and that's, that's because of light. And I think, on a smaller scale, when we go to bed with our phones and we're checking, maybe our Facebook feed late at night, and then we turn off our phones and expect to be able to fall asleep. But really, the light has, been telling us that we need to be awake. And in ancient times, we were much more tied to the darkness, right? We would sleep when it would get dark because there was nothing else to do, right? And so our bodies have kind of slowly adapted to, to this weird kind of new norm, which is that, we're up at all hours, right? And we certainly have trouble sleeping. I think there's a lot of people who really struggle to get good sleep, and one of the reasons is, of course, because of light. And another reason, that we talk about in the book is, of course, eating. One of the bad cycles you can get into is, when you're overweight, that can lead to sleep problems, and when you have sleep problems, you tend to overeat, and it's this bad kind of cyclical issue.
I think the society we live in has a lot to answer for. I mean, we hear so much about obesity increasing among kids as well as adults, and yet everything around us, our entire environment seems to be geared to upsetting our normal bodily rhythms. Yeah, I think that's true. I was noticing the other day, I was in Target, and it was quite late at night, and there was a mother and her young son, and it was maybe 10 o'clock, and maybe this was the only time she could get her shopping done, right? And she had her child in the front of the cart with a bag of goldfish crackers, and the lights were blazing. It's so bright in there, and I thought, he's going to have such a hard time falling asleep, and so will she, right? And so we've adapted to kind of longer hours and working later and having stores open later. And all of that is really contributing to this
our rhythms being really out of whack.
How easy or how difficult was it for you both to actually get into the swing of this diet? I mean, did you find in the beginning that it was a little bit harder than you thought it might be?
I think it certainly took some getting used to. It took me a few weeks. As I was saying, we recommend people start with 12 hours, and once they've done that for a couple weeks, go to 11, do that for a couple weeks, then 10, and work your way down to 9. But I think in a way it was easier than I expected. And once it becomes a habit, it really you just stop thinking about it. So at this point, I barely notice it at all. I eat my meals at a time that feels natural to me now, and after that, I'm just used to not eating anymore.
And I think the other thing that happens is your hunger goes away, or what I thought was hunger. I used to think, how could I possibly go from 7 until kind of 11 o'clock with no food, right? And that's only, 4 hours, right? And I thought that I was going to be hungry during that time. And you're not. You're just used to eating during that time, which is very different, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we eat for so many reasons, as you said earlier. Once upon a time, it was because we needed to fuel our bodies, but not anymore. It's, a whole smorgasbord of reasons. I've just lost my drift. There was a question I was going to ask you then that I thought was a very clever one, but it's gone. Maybe. It was about the mice. You cited some really interesting research about mice who were overfed and those that were then also fed but confined to the required, 9 or 12 hours, and the difference it made. Just say a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean, it's really very striking that such a small change can make such a big difference, even if they're eating the same amount, that just by controlling the time, it somehow seemed to provide this protection against the obesity that otherwise would result from eating all that food.
Certainly seems to be a very easy thing to experiment with. I mean, all you have to do is just not eat for 12 hours, do that for a couple of weeks, and just monitor your weight, see what happens. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with authors Dan Zigmond and Tara Cottrell about the ancient art of losing weight without losing your mind, as outlined in their book, Buddha's Diet. We'll be back after the break.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Spiritual, metaphysical, green living, psychic, alternative healing, life coaching. Do any of these or similar terms apply to your business or cause? If so, you are in a niche market with a very specific audience. Conscious Gate PR is the world's leading conscious public relations agency. With a global reach of over 4 million and growing, we offer comprehensive media campaigns to our targeted market. Learn more at ConsciousGatePR.com. Conscious marketing for conscious minds.
Hi everyone, this is Shay Parker, the host of Best of the Best, which airs live right here on IOM Radio every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm super excited to bring you expert guest hosts, spiritual discussions, free psychic readings, and so much more. I can promise that you will not want to miss this one-of-a-kind, fun, yet touching, down-to-earth show. Join us every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific on OTR-FM. This is Shay Parker, and I can't wait to see you there.
If you own a gun, you have a full-time responsibility. When you aren't using it, be sure it can't get into the hands of curious children, troubled teenagers, a thief, or anyone else who might misuse it. Your family, friends, and neighbors are all counting on you. Remember, always, lock it up. For more information on firearms storage safety, visit ncpc.org. This message brought to you by the National Crime Prevention Council, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Tara Cottrell, Buddha's diet has been described as a science-based, spiritually inspired, time-tested guide to weight loss. Tell us about some of the spiritual aspects of this diet.
I think, so I'm not a Buddhist. Dan obviously is. But I think there's a lot of lessons in the book for kind of lay people who are interested in kind of finding that spiritual part of their lives that can impact, their relationships and, their feelings of well-being and feeling peaceful throughout the day. We talk about in the book, one of the things we talk about is mindfulness around food, but also, meditation. Meditation has gained a lot of, a wider acceptance. It's not just for, Buddhists, obviously. And even kind of the workplace has really, a lot of the corporate wellness programs now incorporate this type of, these types of things that we talk about in the book. I think that, spirituality is really accessible to everybody. And I think we tend to think of it as, kind of a lofty goal that not all of us can find. But really spirituality for me is really being mindful and being, cautious about, how I treat people and how I treat myself and my children. And, this is part of that, right? Being mindful of food and how I'm treating it.
You mentioned meditation. You have a chapter called Meditation for Your Body. What does meditation actually have to do with the body?
Well, meditation is really about mindfulness and developing that kind of mindfulness. And it's a way of kind of getting some focused practice in mindfulness. The specific kind of meditation that we talk about there is to be, very aware of your breathing and of your body. And that can really change your relationship to your body and your relationship to yourself. And so, I think developing that kind of mindful practice just helps your body in so many ways.
Tara, as we learn from the book, Buddha was all about finding the middle ground. And likewise, you say in the book that really the diet is all about finding the middle ground. Since writing the book, have you found that this concept of finding the middle ground is influencing other areas of your life as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most dramatically in how much I tend to take on, just in my personal life, with my kids and trying to balance work and family and different projects that I'm working on. I'm somebody that tends to bite off more than they can chew and volunteer for things that I probably have no business volunteering for. And I think we tend to kind of, working at the Graduate School of Business, one of the kind of catchphrases among the students is what they call FOMO, right? Which is fear of FOMA, which is fear of missing out, right? And we all have that to some degree, right? That we need to kind of, especially in Silicon Valley, we need to try the next new thing, and we need to always be working, and we need to be, juggling a startup while working a regular day job, and while managing, a volunteer job on the side and taking care of our children and being a good spouse and making, delicious meals. And it's just not possible. And I think, reading about, learning about Buddha's middle way, it's kind of given me permission to kind of reduce so much of these outside stressors that I willingly took on for myself, right? To kind of say, no, I can't take on that new thing, or I can't, I'm just not going to be able to help you with that, or, being able to let go of a lot of the things I used to agonize about. So it's really helped me a great deal to know that, someone as clever as the Buddha, like really, if it worked for him, it certainly can work for me, right? This idea of just, not practicing these extremes that we tend to do.
Well, it sounds like something that we should all be looking to adopt. I mean, what about you, Dan? Are you finding that you are looking for the middle ground all the time now?
I do think so. I think that as you were saying, our society has this tendency to push us towards extremes. That if a little bit is good, then a lot must be better, and a whole lot must be even better than that. And I think writing this book has helped me think about how that isn't really true. That the middle way really is preferable to getting pulled from one extreme to another. And you absolutely see it with dieting, with the tendency that many of our friends or ourselves maybe have of going on an extreme diet for a while and hardly eating anything, then getting frustrated and eating everything we can see, and then trying dieting again. And that sort of yo-yo behavior of bouncing from one extreme to the other, just isn't a healthy way to live. And trying to find that middle ground in between is something that I think just gives our lives a lot more balance and is a lot more fulfilling.
Tara, in what other ways has writing this book changed your life?
I think it was a really eye-opening process when we first started researching the book. I thought, well, we're going to have to. Our first draft actually didn't have nearly the amount of science that it does now, and much fewer studies. And I remember when we first started, I thought, well, we should probably cite a few studies. And the more we looked, we realized there was just so much, data around this actually working, which was really gratifying. And I think there's a lot of books out there, about food and about wellness and nutrition that, they kind of speak in hyperbole, or they tout, quick fixes or things that you can do without really showing you the data, right? And I'm not a data scientist, but I think it still really appeals to me, the proof, right? And as Dan was saying, and I think we say in the book, Buddha really wanted proof. He wanted his followers to, try things for themselves and, not blindly follow a path they weren't comfortable with. And so that was a great experience to find that there was all this, information out there and science behind all of this.
Dan, in 2015, you were named one of Wired Magazine's 20 business geniuses you need to know. Do you have any ambition to expand that title to cover 20 diet geniuses we need to know?
Honestly, I never thought that I would write a diet book, and it was not something that I was always dreaming of. But it's been very fulfilling and sort of surprising, the great reception that it's gotten and being able to help people. One of the things as a Buddhist that you're supposed to commit to is to help alleviate suffering, and that was Buddha's great goal in becoming a teacher himself. And so many people really suffer around their relationship to food. And so being able to just help people with some of that and help them get a healthier relationship to food has really just been very, very rewarding.
So what's next for both of you? Are you going to continue writing books together or return to your other lives?
Yeah, we've talked about that. I think there's probably, we're still kind of in the thick of talking about promoting this book and things, but as you mentioned before, there's a lot right now about sleep, and so we have talked a lot about what would Buddha say about sleep and what would Buddha say about work, and there's probably some applications in there with those types of things that maybe Buddha had some advice for us there as well.
And writing the book together really was a lot of fun.
I'm sure Buddha's got a lot to say about a lot of things. I mean, you could have a whole raft of books. I mean, parenting, although in the beginning he wasn't a particularly good parent.
That's right.
Sex, you name it. The topics are endless.
That's true. I do think there's a lot of applications of this middle way to all sorts of parts of life.
Well, we shall look forward to the next one then. Dan Zigmond, Tara Cottrell, thank you for joining us today. It's been a treat to talk to you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You can find out more about Dan Zigmond and Tara Cottrell at the website buddhasdiet.com. You can follow them on Facebook, facebook.com/Buddha's Diet Book. And the book, of course, is called Buddha's Diet, The Ancient Art of Losing Weight Without Losing Your Mind. And it's published by Running Press and available on Amazon and all good bookstores. Well, that's it for today. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I hope you join me next week for another edition of What is Going On. Till then, it's goodbye from me.